Hey folks, it's Strange here, your one and only guide through the absolute sewer that is dirty Hollywood. And tonight we're not just cracking open a can of worms, we're dumping the entire dumpster fire right in your lap. Picture this. It's a crisp March evening in 2026. The kind of night where the Hollywood hills are still pretending everything is golden. And suddenly E! Network drops a 2-episode gut punch called Dirty Rotten Scandals. The camera cuts to a dimly lit interview room, the kind with those harsh overhead lights that make every wrinkle look like a confession. And there's Holly Hallstrom, former Barker's beauty, the tall blonde who stood next to Bob Barker for almost 20 years, staring straight into the lens like she's been waiting her whole damn life to say this. Her voice cracks, raw as an open wound, and she spits it out. I hate that man. Not Bob Barker, the smiling game show legend. Not the guy who gave away cars and told America to spay and neuter their pets. No, she means the real Bob Barker, the one the public never saw, the one who allegedly turned Studio 33 into his personal playground of power, coercion and cover-ups. And right there, folks, the screen freezes on her face, eyes blazing, and you hear the faint echo of that iconic Price is Right theme music twisting into something sinister. Come on down to the truth. We're about to reconstruct every filthy layer of this story like a crime scene investigator with a microscope and a grudge. We are talking leaked depositions, whispered set gossip that's been buried for decades, old interview clips where the smiles don't quite reach the eyes, court filings that read like bad fan fiction except they're 100% real, and insiders who are still scared to go on record, but damn if they haven't been texting me anonymously since the docuseries aired. Because let's be real for a second, you thought The Price is Right was all bright lights, big prizes and wholesome family fun? Think again. This is the show that ran for 35 years under Bob Barker's iron fist, the one that made him a household name worth hundreds of millions. While behind the curtains the models were allegedly dodging groping hands, enduring stares that lasted way longer than any so-called 10-second rule CBS tried to slap on the place, and watching one of their own get dragged into a relationship she later swore felt like a job requirement. And here's where shit gets truly fucked up. The man at the center of it all was the same guy America trusted every weekday morning to keep things light and fun. Bob Barker wasn't just hosting a game show, he was allegedly running a machine that chewed up women and spit them out when they stopped playing along. But before we rip the bandage of the fresh wounds from that 2026 docu-series, we've got to go all the way back, because the real story isn't just one lawsuit or one affair. It's the entire life of a man who climbed out of nothing and built an empire on charm, control, and according to the women who lived it, something much darker. Imagine a dusty little town called Darrington, Washington, back in 1923. That's where Robert William Barker draws his first breath on December 12th. The son of a high school science teacher father who dies when the kid is just a toddler, and the mother who packs up everything and moves them to the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Bob Barker spent part of his childhood on a Sioux reservation, raised partly by his mother's side of the family with deep native roots. People who knew the family back then describe a scrappy kid, the kind who had to hustle just to eat. No silver spoon here, folks. His mom Tilly takes teaching jobs wherever she can, and young Bob learns early that survival means being likable, being quick, being the guy who can talk his way into or out of anything. He's got that natural charisma even as a boy. Teachers remember him cracking jokes in class, always the center of attention, always performing. Fast forward through the Great Depression years, the family scraping by on whatever odd jobs they can find, and Bob eventually heads off to Drury College in Missouri on a basketball scholarship, because surprise surprise, the kid's tall and athletic and knows how to work a crowd. World War II is raging and Bob joins the Navy, though he never sees combat, spends his time stateside, honing that smooth talking radio voice that would later become his trademark. After the war, he lands a job at a small radio station in Springfield, Missouri, doing everything from news to disc jockey gigs, learning how to sell himself and sell the product. He meets a girl named Dorothy Jo Gideon at a carnival in 1944. Picture it, the two of them on the Ferris wheel, young and broke and full of dreams. They marry the next year in a simple ceremony, And for the next 36 years, Dorothy Jo is his rock, his partner, the woman who allegedly kept him grounded until the day she died. Insiders who knew them in those early days say Dorothy Jo was the one who pushed him toward bigger things, the one who believed in his talent when no one else did. They moved to California in the 50s, chasing the Hollywood dream the way so many did. Bob hustling for any announcing gig he can get, living in cheap apartments, eating beans and rice some nights. By 1956, he is hosting his first big TV show, Truth or Consequences, a game show where contestants do ridiculous stunts for prizes. It's a hit, and suddenly Bob Barker is a name people recognize. But the big break, the one that cements him as a legend, comes in 1972, when he takes over The Price is Right. Picture the set back then. Studio 33 at CBS Television City in Los Angeles. That massive stage with a giant wheel, the colorful backdrops. The audience packed in like sardines, screaming for their shot at glory. Bob walks out in his tailored suits, that signature tan, the microphone in hand, and the catchphrase is born: "Come on down!" The show is an instant phenomenon, pulling in millions of viewers every day. It's light, it's fun, it's the American dream in 30 minutes. Contestants from every walk of life, winning cars, trips, appliances they could never afford. Bob becomes synonymous with the show. He's not just the host, he's the face, the voice, the moral compass who reminds everyone to spay and neuter their pets at the end of every episode. By the 80s, he's making bank, millions upon millions in salary, plus endorsements, plus producing gigs. The empire grows. He buys property, invests smart, and the public image is pristine. Devoted husband, animal rights activist, the nice guy who never forgot his humble roots. But here's where the story starts to twist, because even in those early golden years, there were whispers if you knew where to listen. Former crew members who've spoken off the record over the years describe a man who ran the set like his personal kingdom. Decisions on who got hired, who got airtime, who got the better dressing room, those all flowed through Bob. And when his wife Dorothy Jo passes away in 1981 from lung cancer, something shifts. People close to the production at the time say Bob changed. He became more intense, more demanding. The charming widower who'd lost the love of his life starts leaning on the women around him in ways that, according to later accounts, crossed every professional line. The docuseries in 2026 doesn't pull punches here. Former producer Barbara Hunter, who worked on the show in the mid-70s, sits in that same dimly lit interview chair and recounts how harassment was just part of the atmosphere. She describes being in the elevator one day, minding her own business, when a male staffer reaches out and grabs her breasts outright. She pushes him away, doesn't say a word, because that's what you did back then. It became instinct, she says. And Bob? According to multiple voices in the docuseries, if anyone brought a complaint to him, he'd allegedly shut it down fast. Get over it, or look for a new job. That's a quote straight from Holly Hallstrom's mouth in 2026. No HR department worth a damn, no real oversight, just Bob Barker's word as law. Let's talk about the models, because they were the eye candy that made the show pop. Barker's beauties, they called them. Tall, gorgeous, smiling women in those tight dresses who wheeled out the prizes and flirted with the camera. Janice Pennington, Holly Hallstrom, Diane Parkinson, Kathleen Bradley, they were the fantasy every middle-aged man at home was watching for. But according to the women themselves, being a beauty meant more than just smiling and pointing. It meant navigating a minefield of male egos, of lingering stares from crew and audience alike. Of a culture where CBS eventually had to institute a so-called 10-second rule. Don't stare at the models for more than 10 seconds. Yeah, that was their big solution to complaints about harassment. Holly laughs bitterly in the docuseries when she brings it up. It was a joke, she says. It was an appeasement. They did things that made it look like they were taking action, so you would stop complaining and go away. And right in the middle of all this sits Bob Barker, the ultimate authority figure, the guy who could make or break your career with a single phone call. Now, zoom in on 1989. Bob is 65 years old, still hosting 5 days a week, still the king of daytime television. He's been quietly dating Nancy Burnett since 1983, but according to every account that's come out since, he started something on the side with one of his longest-serving beauties, Diane Parkinson. Diane had been on the show since 1975, almost 2 decades of service. She was a former Miss World contestant, stunning, professional, the kind of woman who knew how to play the game. People who were in the room back then swear the chemistry was obvious almost immediately. Holly Hallstrom, who was right there on set every day, describes it in the docuseries like she is still living it. I first realized, long before the rest of the set knew, that Diane and Bob were having sex. She would go downstairs during the breaks and go into his dressing room, and that's when some hanky-panky was going on. Imagine the scene, folks. The taping breaks for commercial, the audience is milling around, the lights are hot, and Diane slips away to Bob's private dressing room, the one he jokingly called Daddy's room, according to some of the wilder rumors that floated around the lot. Insiders who were there describe the door closing, the muffled sounds, the way Diane would come back out with her makeup slightly smudged, trying to act normal while the rest of the cast exchanged knowing glances. According to Diane's own later claims, in that 1994 lawsuit, case number BC106366 in Los Angeles Superior Court, she didn't feel like she had a choice. She alleged that Bob pressured her into the relationship, that it started consensual but quickly became coercive, that she had to perform sexual acts, including oral sex, according to court documents, to keep her job. She said the fear of being fired was constant, that Bob made it clear the show was his and her spot depended on keeping him happy. Barker, of course, denied every bit of the coercion when the story broke. In a press conference he held with his lawyer Jeffrey Berman, he admitted the affair, called it hanky-panky, said it lasted about 18 months, from 1989 to 1991, but insisted Diane initiated it and that it was 100% consensual. He even went on Larry King Live years later and doubled down, painting himself as the victim of a woman who wanted more money and more attention. But here is the scene that makes your stomach turn when you read the depositions. Diane wasn't some gold digger fresh off the bus. She'd been on the show for 18 years. She had a reputation as a pro. Why blow it all up unless something truly broke inside her? The relationship allegedly soured hard by 1991. Word on the set, according to multiple beauties in the 2026 docuseries, was that Diane wanted out, that the fighting started, the yelling in the hallways, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Holly describes it as massive, fighting on the sets, yelling, and it ultimately, I think, destroyed The Price is Right. Imagine walking into that studio every morning knowing the host and one of the main models were at each other's throats, knowing the whole thing could explode publicly at any second. And explode it did, but not until 1993, when Diane quietly leaves the show. Bob announces on air that she is pursuing other interests, but insiders say the real reason was the emotional toll plus health issues she'd been dealing with, bleeding ulcers from the stress, according to her own doctor's notes that later surfaced in court filings. She's gone, but the damage is done. The other models are watching, wondering if their own careers are next, if they step out of line. And that, my friends, is where the real bombshell detonates in 1994. Diane files that $8 million sexual harassment lawsuit against Bob Barker and the show's producers. The complaint is brutal, pages and pages detailing alleged incidents in Bob's dressing room, in hotel rooms during remote tapings, claims that she felt trapped because refusing him meant losing the only steady gig she'd known for nearly 2 decades. Court documents describe a pattern of quid pro quo, sleep with me or say goodbye to the paycheck, the fame, the lifestyle. Barker's legal team fights back hard. They get every employee they can to sit for depositions, asking pointed questions designed to trash Diane's character. Did she flirt? Did she wear revealing clothes? Did she ever complain before? Holly Hallstrom tells the docuseries she was dragged into those lawyer meetings over and over. Every time you went to the studio, you had to sit with lawyers who all they wanted to hear was all the bad stuff about Diane and how Bob could not have possibly sexually harassed Diane. It was clear what side you were supposed to be on if you wanted to keep working, but Holly refuses to play ball. She won't perjure herself, won't lie under oath to protect the boss. And that decision, according to her 2026 interview, puts her square on Bob Barker's shit list. The retaliation, she claims, is swift. Suddenly her weight is an issue. Medication for a medical condition had caused her to gain some pounds, and the producers start pressuring her to slim down or else. In October 1995, she's out, told it's time for early retirement. She is devastated, broke, and convinced it's payback for not testifying against Diane. Barker, meanwhile, sues her for defamation after she goes on hard copy and tells her side. The legal war drags on for years. 10 years of court dates, depositions, stress that Holly says left her living out of her car at one point, totally wiped out financially. Barker drops his suit 48 hours before trial in 2000, but Holly countersues for malicious prosecution and wrongful termination. She wins a multi-million-dollar settlement in 2005. But the damage is done. Careers ruined, lives upended. All while Bob Barker keeps smiling on television like nothing ever happened. And here's the part that really makes you question everything. While this was all going down publicly, CBS and the producers allegedly knew. The 10-second rule? That was their big response to the broader harassment complaints from the models about crew members groping, staring, making crude comments. Kathleen Bradley, another beauty, speaks out in the docuseries about stagehands who were too friendly, rubbing up against the women during tapings. Barbara Hunter recalls the elevator incident like it was yesterday. It wasn't one bad apple, it was the whole barrel, according to these women. And sitting at the top of that barrel was Bob Barker, the guy who allegedly told Holly that if anyone complained, he'd tell them to get over it or look for a new job. The same guy who, according to Hallstrom in the new series, had once allegedly made racist comments on set about black men being the most diseased people on earth. Comments that still shock when you hear them replayed in 2026. The public never saw any of that. They saw the genial host, the animal lover, the man who seemed above it all. But the docuseries doesn't stop at the lawsuits. It digs into the culture that allowed it to flourish for decades. The power imbalance was insane. Bob wasn't just the host. He was executive producer in all but name, the guy whose contract gave him final say on everything, from contestant selection to model outfits. Women who wanted to stay had to smile through it, had to laugh at the jokes, had to pretend the staring and the touching and the pressure was just showbiz. And when one of them finally said enough, the machine turned on her. Diane Parkinson dropped her lawsuit in April 1995, citing health reasons and mounting legal bills. A judge had already fined her and her attorneys thousands for not turning over medical documents fast enough. She stood by her claims but said the fight was destroying her. Barker declared victory, called the whole thing frivolous. The show rolled on like nothing changed. Ratings stayed high. Bob kept hosting until 2007, retiring at 83 with a fortune estimated north of $70 million and a legacy that looked bulletproof. Except legacies aren't bulletproof when the women who lived through it finally get a platform decades later. The 2026 docuseries is the first time many of these voices are speaking on camera together, connecting the dots between the Parkinson affair, the Hallstrom firing, the everyday harassment, the racism, the retaliation. Holly Hallstrom doesn't hold back. She calls Bob cruel, says he dragged her through court for 10 years until she had nothing left. Says she waited until he was dead in 2023 to speak freely, because even after she won her settlement, she knew he'd come after her again. A friend of Diane's, quoted in older reporting that the docuseries revisits, allegedly told Radar Online that Diane called herself Bob Barker's sex slave, that she sacrificed her body to keep her job and there was nothing she could do about it. Word on the street from people who were in the dressing rooms back then is that Bob liked to call himself Daddy, that the power dynamic was never equal. And according to insiders still scared to talk on record, there were other incidents, other models who chose silence because the money was too good and the blackballing was too real. Let's pause for a second and ask the question we all know is hanging in the air. How the fuck did this even happen? How does a man from a reservation in South Dakota, who built his career on charm and folksy wisdom, allegedly create an environment where women felt they had to trade sex for job security? How does a network like CBS look the other way for years while complaints piled up? The answer, as always in these Hollywood stories, is power. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and Bob Barker had absolute power over The Price is Right for 35 years. He wasn't just the face, he was the brand. Sponsors loved him, audiences adored him, executives feared rocking the boat. So when rumors swirled, when lawsuits landed, the machine protected its asset. Settlements were paid quietly where possible, NDAs were the order of the day, and the public narrative stayed squeaky clean, because who wants to believe their childhood hero is anything less than perfect? But the 2026 docu-series changes the game. It doesn't just rehash old news, it brings fresh voices, fresh pain, fresh context. Kathleen Bradley talks about the casual racism and sexism that permeated the set. Barbara Hunter details how women learned to navigate unwanted advances as part of the job description. Holly Hallstrom lays out the timeline of the Parkinson fallout and how it poisoned the entire workplace, leading to her own destruction. And through it all, the ghost of Bob Barker looms large, smiling on old footage, but now the smile looks different, calculated, controlling. The kind of man who could allegedly force an 18-month sexual relationship and then, when the woman tried to leave, make her pay for it with her career, her health, her reputation. We are only scratching the surface here, folks, because this story goes way deeper than one affair and one lawsuit. There are other models who came forward later. Lanisha Cole in 2011, suing producers for sexual harassment and false imprisonment. Claudia Jordan tying her own experiences to the courage Holly showed. There are the endless rumors that never made it to court but circulated through the industry like poison. Bob's dressing room not always as private as it seemed. The way certain beauties got better assignments if they stayed in his good graces. The way complaints disappeared into the ether. And then there's the bigger picture. The way The Price is Right became a microcosm of everything wrong with old-school Hollywood. Power imbalances so vast they felt normal, women treated as props. A star so untouchable that even when the truth leaked, it barely dented his armor. But the docu-series is cracking that armor wide open in 2026. Viewers are watching and texting me non-stop. Some outraged that their childhood memories are tainted, others finally feeling seen after decades of silence. And the industry, they are scrambling. Bob's longtime rep Roger Neal comes out swinging after the episode's air, calling Barker beloved and insisting the claims don't match the man he knew. But the women who lived it say otherwise. Holly Hallstrom looks into the camera and says she lost everything. Broke, homeless, blacklisted because she wouldn't lie for Bob. That kind of testimony doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a lifetime of carrying a secret that finally gets too heavy to hold. But let me tell you exactly how that calculated machine kicked into high gear the moment Diane Parkinson filed those papers in 1994. Picture the green room at CBS Television City, the one with the faded couches and the coffee that always tasted like it had been sitting there since the Nixon administration. It is a Tuesday morning, just days after the lawsuit hit the papers, and the lawyers are already swarming like sharks in charmed water. Thomas Chelly and Lawrence Labovitz are on Diane's side at first, but Bob Barker's team rolls in heavy with their own crew, and suddenly every single beauty and every producer gets pulled into these closed-door sessions that feel less like prep and more like interrogations designed to break you if you step out of line. The air in there is thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and desperation. The kinds where nobody makes eye contact for too long, because they all know what is at stake. Bob is not even in the room half the time, but his presence hangs over everything like a threat nobody dares say out loud. The lawyers lean in close, voices low and insistent, and they lay it out plain. We need you to remember every bad thing about Diane, every flirtatious comment she ever made on set, every time she wore something a little too tight, every rumor that she was after money or fame or whatever else they could spin. Come on, they say, you were there, you saw it, she initiated everything, right? It is not subtle, it is not professional, it is a full-on campaign to paint her as the instigator and Bob as the poor widower who got taken advantage of. Holly Hallstrom sits through meeting after meeting, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, and she refuses to play the game. She tells them flat out she is not going to lie under oath just to protect the boss. The room goes dead quiet every time she pushes back. You can imagine the looks on their faces, those tight-lipped expressions that say, "You are making a huge mistake here, lady." But Holly is not budging. She has been on the show since 1977. She knows the score, and she is done watching the machine chew people up. Meanwhile, the rest of the cast is sweating. Janice Pennington, who had already been through her own nightmare back in 1988, when a swinging camera knocked her clean off the stage during a live taping and left her with shoulder injuries that ended her swimsuit modeling days, is caught in the crossfire too. She has been there almost 30 years by this point, loyal as they come, but even she starts feeling the pressure to line up against Diane. Kathleen Bradley, the first full-time black model who joined in 1990, is in those same rooms, and what she hears later leaks out in ways that make your blood run cold. According to her account, in the 2026 docuseries, some of the production meetings when the models were not around got ugly fast, with the N-word tossed around casually like it was nothing. And Bob himself allegedly shrinking away from black contestants who tried to hug him on stage. The kind of micro-rejection that everyone noticed, but nobody called out because, well, it was Bob Barker's kingdom. Nancy Burnett is in the mix too, the woman Bob had been dating since 1983, the steady presence who thought she had a real shot at something permanent after Dorothy Jo. Word on the set was that Nancy found out about the whole Diane situation the hard way, and she was not happy. She allegedly called Holly at one point to vent, piecing together the timeline of fights and screaming matches. Imagine that phone call, late at night, Nancy's voice cracking as she realizes the man she is with has been sneaking off with one of the beauties, while she is sitting at home thinking things are solid. It adds another layer of betrayal that nobody on the outside ever saw, because publicly Bob is still the grieving widower turned devoted boyfriend, the guy who keeps everything buttoned up tight. But insiders say the overlap made the whole mess even more explosive, because now there is jealousy in the air on top of everything else, and the power plays get personal fast. Let us zoom into the courtroom itself, because this is where the real knives come out. Los Angeles Superior Court. Case number BC 106366, and the depositions stretch on for months. Diane is in there, day after day, recounting the pressure she felt starting back in 1989. The way Bob allegedly made it clear that keeping her spot meant keeping him satisfied. The hotel rooms during remote tapings where things went further than she ever wanted. Her doctors are on record talking about the bleeding ulcers that started around the same time the fights with Bob escalated, the anemia that left her exhausted and scared. The stress is eating her alive, but she is holding the line. Bob, for his part, is out in front of the cameras doing damage control. He holds that press conference with his attorney, admits to the hanky-panky, but swears it was all her idea. Says she came onto him and he went along because, hey, he is only human. He even goes on Larry King Live later and doubles down, calling the whole thing a money grab, painting himself as the victim. The audience at home eats it up because Bob Barker is America's grandpa, the guy who tells you to help control the pet population, the one who would never do anything shady. But in the docuseries, the women who lived it roll their eyes at those clips now, because they know the version that never made it to air. Diane's health keeps crumbling under the weight of it all. By April 1995, she has had enough. She stands by every allegation, but the legal bills are mounting, the stress is destroying her body, and her doctor is begging her to walk away before it kills her. She drops the suit, and the judge, Edward Ross, fines her and her attorneys a total of $2,100 for not turning over medical documents fast enough. Bob declares victory, calls it frivolous, and the show keeps rolling like nothing happened. But the poison is already in the water. The other models who refused to trash Diane in those depositions start feeling the heat. Kathleen Bradley and Janice Pennington are both in the crosshairs now, and by 2000 the axe falls hard. On the same day, both women get the call. They are out, fired, without warning, no goodbye, no thank you for almost 2 decades of service each. Kathleen is numb when she hears it. She picks up the phone and calls Janice right away, and Janice says the exact same thing happened to her. They sue for wrongful termination, claiming it was payback for not lying to save Bob's ass. The docuseries shows the raw pain in their faces even decades later. Janice had survived that camera accident years earlier, fought through surgeries and scars, and still showed up every day smiling. Castian had broken barriers as the first full-time black beauty, dealing with racist fan mail that called her everything from a diversity hire to worse. Slurs slipped into production meetings behind closed doors. And now this. They both put in the lawsuit, but the fight drags on and the emotional toll is brutal. Holly's world is unraveling in parallel, and it is a slow-motion car crash you cannot look away from. After she gets the boot in October 1995, officially blamed on a 14-pound weight gain from medication for a legitimate medical condition, she tries to tell her side. She goes on hard copy, lays it out, without naming names at first, but everyone knows exactly who she is talking about. Bob does not take it lightly. He slaps her with a defamation suit, and suddenly she is the one in court fighting for her life. The legal war lasts 10 years. Bob drops his case 48 hours before trial in 2000, but Holly countersues for malicious prosecution and wrongful termination. She wins a multi-million-dollar settlement in 2005, but the damage is done. She is broke by then, living out of her current points. The savings wiped out by lawyer fees and the sheer stress of it all. The docuseries shows old footage of her back then, looking haunted, and then cuts to her in 2026, finally free to speak, because Bob passed in 2023. She calls him vicious, says he tried to break her completely, not just fire her, but destroy any chance she had at a normal life afterward. People who were close to her during that dark period swear she slept in her vehicle for weeks at a time, driving around Los Angeles with everything she owned in the trunk, too proud to ask for help but too scared to stop fighting. And here is where the racism angle gets truly disgusting. Because the 2026 docuseries does not shy away from it. Kathleen Bradley opens up about the fan letters that poured in after she joined, some of them so wild they had to be screened out before they reached her. But it was not just the audience. Production insiders allegedly used the N-word in meetings when the models were not around. And Bob himself is accused of making comments that painted black men as the most diseased people on earth. The kind of casual bigotry that made the set feel hostile for anyone who was not white and compliant. Claudia Jordan, who came after Kathleen, backs her up with stories of stereotyping and harassment that went unchecked for years. One former producer, Phil Wayne, is name-dropped in the series as someone who allegedly saw the culture up close and did not do enough to stop it. The women describe how black contestants would try to hug Bob on stage, and he would pull back visibly, the discomfort obvious to anyone paying attention. It was not loud racism, they say, it was the sneaky kind that lived in the silences and the side eyes, and the way opportunities dried up if you pushed back. Barbara Hunter, the producer who had been there since the 70s, adds her own layer in the interviews. She talks about the elevator incident where a male staffer groped her outright, and how when she brought complaints higher up, the response was always the same: get over it or find another job. She watched the Diane situation explode and saw the way the whole production circled the wagons around Bob. The 10-second rule that CBS tried to enforce was a joke, she says, just window dressing so they could claim they were doing something while the real problems festered. The power structure was so lopsided that models learned to navigate unwanted advances the way you learn to dodge traffic in Los Angeles, instinctive and constant. And when one of them finally fought back, the retaliation was swift and merciless. Diane lost her health and her career. Holly lost her home and her stability for years. Kathleen and Janice lost their jobs after decades of loyalty. All while Bob kept collecting his massive paychecks, kept smiling for the cameras, kept telling America to spay and neuter their pets like he was the moral center of the universe. The financial stakes were enormous too. The show was pulling in tens of millions every season. Sponsors loved the wholesome image. And Bob's contract gave him producer-level control, even if the title did not always say it. Settlements were paid quietly when possible. NDAs floated as the easy way out, and the network turned a blind eye because rocking the boat meant losing the #1 daytime program. Insiders who have stayed silent until the docuseries swear there were other incidents that never made it to court, other beauties who choose to walk away rather than fight and risk the same destruction. Leaked internal memos from the era referenced in the series show executives worrying about the optics but never actually fixing the root problem. One whispered rumor that still circulates among old crew members is that Bob liked to keep certain dressing room doors locked during breaks. And the women who knew the code learned fast what it meant if you were invited inside alone. By the late 90s, the culture had calcified into something ugly and entrenched. New models coming in were warned quietly by the veterans. Keep your head down, smile big, do not rock the boat. The lawsuits were settled or dropped. The firings happened behind closed doors, and the public narrative stayed pristine. Bob retired in 2007 at 83, handed the reins to Drew Carey, and walked away with a fortune and a legacy that looked untouchable. But the women he left in his wake carried the scars for decades. Holly spent years rebuilding from nothing. Kathleen fought her own legal battles and spoke out about the racism that made her time on set feel like walking a tightrope. Janice dealt with the physical pain from that old injury. On top of the emotional whiplash of being discarded after 29 years, the docuseries brings them all together in that same dimly lit room, and you can see the relief on their faces now that they do not have to whisper anymore. Bob is gone, the fear of retaliation is finally lifted, and the truth is spilling out in ways that make the old footage of the show feel completely different when you watch it today. Yet even with all that out in the open, the industry response is predictable. Bob's longtime publicist Roger Neal comes out swinging after the episodes drop, calling him beloved and insisting none of this matches the man he knew. The network issues a vague statement about taking the past seriously, while refusing to comment on specifics. And the fans, some of them anyway, defend Bob to the death because nostalgia is a hell of a drug and nobody wants their childhood memories tainted. But the women who lived it do not care about the nostalgia. They care about the fact that for 35 years, Studio 33 operated like a pressure cooker of control, where sex, power, race, and money all mixed into a toxic stew that destroyed careers and nearly destroyed lives. And the 2026 series is the first time the full picture comes into focus, connecting the dots between the Parkinson lawsuit, the Hallstrom legal war, the Bradley and Pennington firings, the racist undercurrents, and the everyday harassment. That was treated like just another day at the office. We're still not done peeling back the layers here, because the real question is how a man who started with nothing, who built an empire on folksy charm and animal rights activism, allegedly let that empire rot from the inside while everyone around him looked the other way. The money flowed, the ratings stayed high, the sponsors kept writing checks, and the women paid the price. Nancy Burnett stayed by his side through it all, at least publicly. But the private toll on her must have been enormous. Knowing what was happening behind the scenes, Diane never fully recovered her health or her career after dropping the suit. And to this day, friends say, she refers to that period as the time she sacrificed everything just to survive. Holly rebuilt slowly, but the bitterness lingers, raw and unfiltered. In every interview she gives now, Kathleen and Janice moved on to other things, but the abrupt end to their Price is Right chapter left a mark that never quite faded. And through it all, the machine kept turning, spitting out new episodes, new contestants, new smiles for the camera, while the truth stayed buried until a docuseries finally dragged it into the light. You are starting to see how deep this rot went, folks, how many people knew and stayed silent because the paycheck was too good or the fear was too real. The betrayals did not stop with the lawsuits. They kept rippling outward, affecting everyone who stepped foot on that stage for years afterwards. And we're about to go even further into the long shadow those years cast over the entire show. The way the culture lingered even after Bob stepped down, the new lawsuits that popped up under different hosts, and the industry-wide pattern that made The Price is Right just one symptom of something much bigger and uglier in Hollywood. But the real poison did not stop seeping out when Bob Barker finally handed over the microphone in 2007. Picture the same Studio 33, lights still blazing, audience still screaming. But now the man in the sharp suit is Drew Carey, the comedian with the glasses and the deadpan delivery, stepping into a role that carried the weight of decades of baggage nobody wanted to talk about. The transition looked smooth on camera, ratings stayed solid, the wheel kept spinning, but behind the scenes, the old patterns had already sunk their teeth in deep and refused to let go. New beauties walked onto that stage thinking they were living the dream, only to find themselves navigating the exact same minefield their predecessors had warned about in hushed conversations over the years. The machine had not been fixed, it had simply been rebranded, and the money kept pouring in, while fresh faces learned the hard way what loyalty to the brand really cost. Let us talk about Lanisha Cole, because her story in 2011 rips the bandage off and shows exactly how little had changed. She had been a Barker's beauty since 2003. Tall, striking, the kind of presence that lit up the stage. But by the time she filed her lawsuit in Los Angeles Superior Court, she was done smiling through it. The complaint lays it all out in brutal detail, naming executive producer Mike Richards and other key figures in what she called a pattern of sexual harassment and outright false imprisonment. Imagine this, folks. During a remote taping in Hawaii, Lanisha says she was locked in a room with Richards while he made crude advances, pressuring her to stay put until she played along. She describes the fear, the power imbalance, the way her career hung in the balance if she pushed back. This was not 1989 anymore. This was the 21st century, post-Me Too whispers starting to build. And yet, the same toxic culture allegedly thrived under the new host. Lanisha was not some rookie either. She had put in 8 years, built a following, and still felt trapped enough to take the nuclear option. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the industry because it proved the problems were not just Bob Barker's personal demons, they were baked into the DNA of the show itself. Claudia Jordan, who had joined the lineup in 2008 right after Bob stepped down, backs Lanisha's account with her own experiences that later spilled out in interviews and the 2026 docuseries. She talks about the casual objectification that never went away, the way certain producers would comment on the models' bodies in meetings like they were discussing props instead of people, the lingering stares that made you want to cover up even under the hot studio lights. Claudia, already a veteran from Deal or No Deal, knew the game, but even she was stunned at how openly some of the old guard operated. She describes green room conversations, where the conversation would turn filthy the second the door closed. jokes about who was sleeping with whom to get ahead, and the quiet understanding that complaining could end your run faster than a bad showcase bit. Insiders who worked the show during that transition period swear the culture of silence was still ironclad. You kept your mouth shut, you kept your job, and if you did not, well, there was always another pretty face waiting in the wings, ready to take your place. The financial machine never missed a beat either. By the time Drew took over, The Price is Right was generating over $50 million a year in ad revenue alone. Not counting merchandise, international syndication, and the endless reruns that kept Bob's face on screens long after he left. The show became a cash cow that CBS protected at all costs, which is why when Lanisha's suit landed, they circled the wagons again, just like they had in the 90s. Depositions dragged on, character assassination attempts leaked into the tabloids, and Lanisha eventually settled out of court in 2012 for an undisclosed sum that insiders peg at several $100,000. She walked away from the show, but the damage to her trust in the industry lingered. Friends who spoke to her during that period say she felt betrayed not just by the individuals involved, but by the entire system that let it keep happening. And Drew? Publicly he stayed neutral, focused on the fun and games, but people close to the production claim he was aware of the tension and tried to steer the ship toward a cleaner image, without ever fully confronting the rot underneath. Now, let us pull back and look at Bob himself in those final years, because the man who built the empire did not just fade quietly into retirement. He stayed active, popping up in guest appearances, doing charity work for animal rights, giving interviews where he still played the role of the lovable grandfather. But the lawsuits and the whispers followed him like shadows. In 2011, right around the time Lanisha filed, Bob was 87 and still sharp as ever, but the public narrative was starting to crack. Old clips resurfaced, the ones where he made off-color remarks or where the camera caught him in moments that looked a lot less innocent once you knew the backstory. Nancy Burnett remained by his side until the very end, the relationship that had weathered the Diane storm and everything after. But even she allegedly confided to close friends that the pressure of the public image had taken its toll. Bob's net worth at retirement had ballooned to over $70 million from salary, producing credits, and smart investments. Money that kept growing through residuals and licensing deals long after he stopped hosting. He lived in a sprawling estate in the Hollywood Hills, surrounded by the kind of luxury that made the broke kid from the reservation seem like a distant dream. Yet according to people who visited him in his later years, there was always an undercurrent of defensiveness whenever the old scandals came up. His death on August 26, 2023, at the age of 99, should have closed the book. The tributes poured in from every corner of television. Drew Carey posted heartfelt messages. Celebrities lined up to call him a legend, an icon, the voice of a generation. But death has a funny way of loosening tongues. And within months, the first real cracks in the official story started to appear. Former crew members who had stayed silent out of fear finally felt safe enough to speak off the record, texting journalists and podcasters with details they had buried for decades. One anonymous production assistant from the early 2000s described walking into Bob's old dressing room during a cleanup years after he left and finding handwritten notes tucked in a drawer. Little reminders about which models to give extra attention to and which ones to keep at arm's length. Whether those notes were real or not, the rumor alone fueled the fire that led straight to the 2026 docuseries. Producers at E! Network saw the opening and went all in, tracking down every surviving beauty, every producer who would talk, every court transcript that had been sealed and then unsealed over the years. The series does not just rehash the past. It connects the dots to the bigger picture of how Hollywood protected its own for generations. We meet former CBS executives who now admit in anonymous interviews that complaints about the set environment were dismissed as long as the ratings held. One former vice president of daytime programming, speaking with his face blurred and voice disguised, says the network's legal team had a file on Barker that was thicker than the Bible. filled with settlement offers and non-disclosure agreements that kept everything quiet. The money involved was staggering. Each settlement, each payoff came straight from the show's massive profit pool. Money that could have gone to better working conditions or actual accountability, but instead vanished into lawyers' pockets and silence payments. And the models, many of them never recovered financially. Lanisha Cole pivoted to other hosting gigs and advocacy work, but the emotional scars made her wary of every new opportunity. Claudia Jordan channeled her experiences into speaking out about workplace harassment across the industry, turning pain into a platform that helped other women find their voices. We also get deeper into the biographies of the women who came after the original crew. Women like Gwendolyn Osborne, who joined in 2008 and stayed through the transition, watching the culture shift but never fully change. She describes the pressure to stay camera-ready 24/7, the unspoken rule that you never gained a pound or aged a day, or you risked being replaced. Insiders say she once confronted a producer about inappropriate comments and was told in no uncertain terms that rocking the boat was not in the job description. Then there is Rachel Reynolds, still on the show today, who has managed to navigate the later years with a lower profile, but even she has spoken in passing about the challenges of being a woman in that environment long after the original scandals. The docu-series interviews her briefly, and you can see the careful wording, the way she chooses every phrase like she is still protecting something fragile. The financial trail goes even darker when you start following the sponsorship money. Brands like those selling cars and appliances kept pouring tens of millions into the show because the wholesome family image sold product. Never mind what was happening GTK. Leaked internal emails referenced in the series show executives worrying about potential PR disasters, but always choosing to pay to make problems disappear rather than fix the root causes. One chain of messages from 2009, right after Drew started, discusses how to handle a complaint from a new model without letting it reach the press. The solution? A quiet meeting, a raise, and a reminder that loyalty was everything. It is the same playbook Bob had allegedly used for years, just updated with better lawyers and more sophisticated non-disclosure language. And here is where the story circles back to the human cost in a way that makes your stomach turn. Holly Hallstrom, after winning her settlement in 2005, spent years rebuilding from rock bottom, taking odd jobs, living modestly, and watching from the sidelines as the show she helped make famous kept raking in cash without her. Kathleen Bradley and Janice Pennington both found new paths. Kathleen in acting and voice work, Janice in real estate and occasional guest spots. But the abrupt ending to their Price is Right chapter left them with trust issues that never fully healed. Diane Parkinson, the original whistleblower, in so many ways, faded from public view after dropping her suit, dealing with ongoing health problems and the knowledge that she had sacrificed her body and her career just to survive. Friends say she still carries the weight of it all, referring to those years as a chapter she wishes she could erase, but knows she cannot. The 2026 docu-series forces all of this into the light at once, using never-before-seen footage, private diaries from crew members, and fresh interviews that cut through the nostalgia like a knife. It shows how the power structure Bob created survived him, how Drew Carey inherited a machine that was already oiled with secrets and payoffs, how the network kept the profits flowing while the women paid the real price. Viewers watching in 2026 are texting each other in real time, sharing old episodes with new eyes, realizing that the bright lights and big prizes always came with a darker underbelly. The industry is scrambling again, issuing statements about zero tolerance, while quietly hoping the story dies down. But the women are not letting it. They are done whispering. They are done protecting the brand village at the expense of their own truth. The money trail alone is enough to make you furious. Bob's estate after his death was valued at over $70 million, passed on to charities and family, but the women whose labor built that fortune received fractions in settlements that barely covered their legal fees. The show continues today, still pulling huge audiences, still making CBS rich, but the docu-series has changed. How a whole generation sees it. What used to feel like innocent fun now carries the echo of every closed-door meeting, every unwanted advance, every career that got crushed under the weight of silence. We're getting closer to the raw nerve here, folks, because the 2026 series does not stop at the lawsuits and the firings. It digs into the psychological toll, the way these women carried the shame and the anger for decades, the way their families suffered alongside them, the way the entire entertainment industry looked the other way because Bob Barker was too big to fail. New players emerge in the interviews, former interns who saw things they never forgot, makeup artists who heard the arguments through thin walls, security guards who were told to look the other way when certain people entered certain rooms. The picture that emerges is not just one man's dark side, it is a system that rewarded control and punished anyone who challenged it. You can feel the tension building even now, years after the last episode taped under Bob, because the same studio, the same wit, the same catchphrase still carries the ghost of everything that happened there. And the docuseries makes sure you cannot look away anymore. It forces you to ask why it took until 2026 for the full story to break wide open. Why so many knew and said nothing? Why the money was always more important than the people? But the final layer of this investigation peels back every last protection around that legacy in ways that make you wonder how the hell the machine kept spinning for so long after the man himself was gone. Picture this. It is late 2025, the kind of quiet winter night in Los Angeles, where the city lights bleed into the fog rolling off the Pacific, and a small team of e-network researchers is huddled in a nondescript conference room at their Burbank offices. The table is covered in redacted documents, old hard drives, and stacks of emails that had been buried in CBS corporate archives for decades. One of the producers, a guy named Marcus Hale, who has been chasing the story since Bob passed, slides a fresh USB drive across the table and hits play. What comes out is not some grainy old interview. It is a series of internal voice memos from 2009, recorded by a former CBS daytime executive named Patricia Lanford, the woman who oversaw the transition when Drew Carey stepped in. Her voice is calm, professional, almost clinical, but the words hit like a slap. She is detailing a closed-door strategy session where the network brass decided the best way to handle lingering complaints from the model lineup was to offer quiet bonuses, rewrite a few clauses in the talent contracts, and make sure nothing ever reached the press. She names names, folks. People like Senior Vice President of Programming at the time, a guy called Randall Thorpe, who allegedly pushed for a blanket non-disclosure refresh across the entire production staff. The memo ends with her saying, almost under her breath, that the priority was always the revenue stream, not the human beings in front of the cameras. That single recording became the backbone of the 2026 docuseries, the piece of evidence that proved the cover-up did not die with Bob Barker. It lived on in boardrooms and legal departments long after he walked away. Those leaks did not stop at one memo. By early 2026, more material started flooding in from anonymous sources inside the estate itself. Bob's will had been probated quietly after his death, leaving the bulk of his $70+ million fortune to animal charities and a handful of family members. But what the public never saw were the sealed addendums that surfaced when estate lawyers tried to block the docuseries from using certain family photos and private letters. One of those addendums, obtained through a court filing in Los Angeles that barely made the news, contained instructions from Bob himself, written in 2022. It directed his executors, a team led by attorney Victor Klein, to aggressively defend the public image if any new allegations surfaced after his passing. The language is cold, calculated, talking about preserving the brand value because residuals from The Price is Right were still generating $8 to $10 million annually in syndication fees alone. Victor Klein, who had represented Bob since the early 2000s, fought tooth and nail behind the scenes to get injunctions against the e-network project. He filed motions claiming invasion of privacy, but the judge shot them down, and suddenly those sealed documents became public record. Insiders who watched the legal back and forth swear Klein was not just protecting a dead client's reputation, he was protecting the ongoing cash flow that flowed to the charities Bob had named, organizations that had quietly benefited from the show's pristine image for years. Let us talk numbers, because this is where the betrayal gets ice cold and the profit motive becomes impossible to ignore. According to financial disclosures that came out during the estate litigation in 2024 and 2025, CBS had paid out a combined total of over $15 million in settlements and legal fees related to harassment and termination claims tied to the show between 1994 and 2012 alone. That figure does not even include the confidential payouts to later models or the internal bonuses handed out to keep people quiet. Meanwhile, the show itself generated more than $1.2 billion in total advertising revenue across its run under Bob and then Drew. $1.2 billion. That is the kind of money that buys a lot of silence. Sponsors like General Motors and Whirlpool kept pouring tens of millions into the program every season because the wholesome daytime slot delivered exactly the audience they wanted, never once asking what was happening when the cameras stopped rolling. The estate continued to collect royalties on everything from reruns to merchandise, pulling in another $25 million between 2023 and 2026 alone. Victor Klein's firm billed the estate over $400,000 just for the failed attempts to shut down the docuseries. And the charities? They received the money, sure, but according to tax filings referenced in the series, several of them quietly distanced themselves from any direct association with the show once the 2026 episode started airing, afraid the association would scare off their own donors. The 2026 series does not just drop these documents and walk away, it brings in fresh voices we have never heard before, people who were in the room during the post-Bob era and watched the machine adapt and survive. There is a former contestant coordinator named Elena Vargas who worked at the show from 2010 to 2015. She sits in that same dimly lit interview setup, her hands trembling slightly as she describes how the culture of favoritism never faded. She talks about specific producers who would pull certain models aside after tapings for what they called private feedback sessions that often lasted longer than necessary and left the women looking drained. Elena names one mid-level producer, a man called Derek Nolan, who allegedly kept a private list of which beauties were considered team players and which ones needed extra monitoring. She says she once overheard Nolan on a call with Network Legal telling them that the best way to handle a complaint was to reassign the model to fewer segments rather than investigate. That call happened in 2013, years after Bob had left, yet the playbook was identical. We also hear from a makeup artist named Sophia Reyes, who had been with the production since 2005 and stayed on through the Drew years. Sophia describes the green room atmosphere in the mid-2010s as one where the jokes had not changed, the power dynamics had not changed, and the fear of speaking up had not changed. She recalls one incident in 2017 where a young model came to her in tears after a producer commented on her body in front of the entire crew, and when Sophia tried to escalate it, she was told the show had a zero-tolerance policy on paper, but that in practice everyone knew better than to make waves. Sophia kept notes, dated entries in a personal journal that the docuseries displays on screen. Entries that detail how the same language Bob had allegedly used decades earlier was still floating around in meetings, just whispered instead of shouted. Those journals became key evidence when the researchers cross-referenced them with the leaked memos. The psychological toll on the next generation of women who stepped onto that stage is laid bare in ways that hit different from anything we have seen before. One former beauty, a woman named Alexandra March, who joined in 2018 and left in 2021, opens up about the isolation she felt even in a room full of people. She describes nights where she would drive home after taping and sit in her car for hours, replaying every comment, every lingering look, wondering if she was overreacting, or if this was just how the industry worked. Alexandra eventually sought therapy, and her therapist's notes, shared with permission in the series, talk about the long-term effects of constant objectification mixed with the pressure to stay grateful for the opportunity. She says the money was good, the exposure was career-changing, but the constant calculation of whether to smile through it or risk being labeled difficult left her with anxiety that still flares up when she hears the theme music on television today. Her story is not about one big lawsuit, it is about the slow burn, the everyday erosion that happened. Even after the big names were gone and the network claimed everything had been cleaned up. Then there is the estate's final attempt to control the narrative, a move that almost worked until it backfired spectacularly. In late 2025, Victor Klein's team reached out to several former cast members with offers of additional payments, in exchange for signing updated non-disclosure agreements that would have prevented them from participating in the docuseries. One of those offers went to a retired producer who had worked directly under Bob in the 90s and stayed on as a consultant into the Drew era. The producer, a man named Harold Finch, recorded the call without telling them and turned it over to the E-Network team. The audio is played in full in the series, Klein's voice smooth and reassuring, promising the payment would help with medical bills, or whatever the recipient needed, as long as they stayed silent about anything they saw or heard. Finch turned it down, and that recording became the smoking gun that proved the cover-up was still active years after Bob's death. It tied the past directly to the present, in a way that made the whole thing feel less like ancient history and more like an ongoing operation. The question the series finally answers, the one that has been hanging over this entire story, is who really profited the most from keeping the lid on for all those years? The answer is not one person. It is a web of executives, lawyers, sponsors, and the network itself. Randall Thorpe, the CBS vice president mentioned in those old memos, went onto a cushy retirement with a golden parachute worth millions. His legacy listed as the guy who kept daytime television profitable during turbulent times. Victor Klein's firm collected millions in legal fees across the estate work and the attempted blocks on the series. The animal charities received the big checks from the estate, but they also enjoyed the halo effect of Bob's public image for decades, an image that helped them raise hundreds of millions more from donors who thought they were supporting a wholesome cause. And CBS? They continued to rake in the syndication money, the ad dollars, the international licensing fees, all while issuing the same vague statements about learning from the past every time a new allegation surfaced. The women, meanwhile, received their settlements in the low six figures at best, money that barely covered the therapy, the lost wages, the years of rebuilding lives that had been put on pause. What would it take to make sure no other show ever repeats this cycle? The docuseries ends with a call for real structural change, not the window dressing we have seen before. It points to the need for independent oversight on long-running programs, for transparent reporting of all complaints to outside auditors, for contracts that actually protect talent instead of shielding the brand. It interviews labor lawyers who specialize in entertainment, who say the current system is still stacked against the people in front of the camera, especially in daytime, where the power has always been concentrated in the hands of a few. The series shows clips of current Price is Right tapings, the wheel still spinning, the audience still cheering, but now overlaid with the voices of the women who came before, reminding us that the smiles we see might still be hiding the same old calculations. By the time the final credits roll on those two episodes in 2026, the industry is already feeling the aftershocks. Sponsors are asking questions behind closed doors, social media is flooded with viewers rewatching old episodes and spotting things they never noticed before, and the network is quietly updating its internal policies, while publicly claiming the show has always been a family-friendly environment. But the truth is out there now, documented, cross-referenced, impossible to bury again. The man who told America the price was right built something that looked perfect on the surface, but the foundation was cracked from the start, and the people who kept it standing knew exactly what they were doing every step of the way. The money flowed, The secret stayed hidden, and the human cost was treated as just another line item in the budget. This entire saga, from the dusty reservation childhood to the billion-dollar empire to the 2026 reckoning, shows us exactly how power works in this town. It protects itself. It rewrites its own history. And it only cracks when enough voices finally refuse to stay quiet. The price is right kept coming on down for decades, but the real price, the one paid in shattered careers and silenced truths, was never shown on screen until now. And that, folks, is the raw, unfiltered truth we came here to uncover. This has been strange, pulling back the curtain on the filthiest corners of dirty Hollywood like only I can. We went deep, we went dark, and we left no stone unturned, because that is what you deserve when you tune into this channel. The stars can try to bury their secrets, but I am always one step ahead, digging until the truth bleeds out. If you are still watching, smash that like button so the algorithm knows we are exposing the real dirt. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because next week we are going even harder on another icon who thinks their past is safely locked away. Drop in the comments right now who you want me to investigate next. I read every single one. And if you have any insider info on any story we have covered or any new one brewing, send it my way. Anonymity 100% guaranteed. The contacts are right there in the description. Your tip could be the one that blows the next scandal wide open. Until next time, stay dirty, stay watching, and remember, in Hollywood the price is never what it seems.